Hello, chaps. Bing Shi Lao here, and I've actually put my notes for this video on the screen because I feel like it's a complex list of things, and it'll be a lot easier for you to follow if you have the option of actually seeing my notes. I certainly needed to make notes for this. So this video is aiming to answer the question of why did Russia intervene now in 2022 in the Ukraine when it took Crimea all the way back in 2014 and supported the Donbass separatist movement also ever since 2014. So why did it take 8 years for this to suddenly flare up again? Now, I think the first explanation has to be the very basic one, that the Donbass rebels were apparently getting attacked more intensively than usual by Ukrainian shelling and tank movements or whatever. There's been this constant border war for 8 years, and it seems natural to think that maybe the Ukrainians escalated that, and that is why Putin finally decided he had to protect these people who are Russians. Now, I hear people in the West refer to the separatists as pro-Russian. That's moronic. These people speak Russian, they are ethnically Russian, they are culturally Russian, they're in a place that was part of Russia for centuries, and increasingly they've actually been given Russian passports. So why are you calling them pro-Russian? Like, pro-Russian is if there's some guy in Paraguay who thinks Putin's awesome and loves Russia. These people are just Russians. They're not pro-Russians. They're literally just Russians who happen to be in the Ukraine because of where the borders were drawn after the USSR, and because it's a common thing in history to end up with people living outside of the state that represents their nation. Small numbers, usually minorities, but it does happen. Just like there's Hungarians living in the center of Romania or something, I believe. Anyway, so I'm not going to get too far into the motives of the rebels or the nature of the 2014 Ukrainian government and how it reduced Russian language rights. And I'm not going to get into things like how the Russian intervention is actually going. Actually, no, I will a little bit. I see people saying that the Russian intervention is failing, and it is sustaining casualties, but I think that's just because they don't want to unleash their full firepower on civilian areas that they want to integrate, or at least come to terms with in some kind of peace deal. It took the UK and the US 3 weeks to conquer Baghdad when they intervened in Iraq. So to mock Russia for not getting very far in 5 days is kind of stupid. It is true, though, that the Russians appear to be taking serious casualties. However, at the same time, Putin is a calculating person, in my opinion. I would be very surprised if he just totally fails. But that is not the topic of this video. The topic of this video is, why is it happening now? Why did it take 8 years for this whole conflict to flare up again in such a dramatic fashion? What is different about the 2022 that made it happen now? And as you can see, there's 6 reasons on the screen. And the first one is the Ukrainian attacks on the Donbass rebels. Apparently they intensified that, and Putin felt he had to intervene. It would be a very, very bad look for Putin to just allow Russians who want to be part of Russia to be conquered by Ukrainians. So he kind of had to go in that sense. But that raises a further question of, okay, he's invading because the Ukrainians were attacking the rebels. But they've been doing that for 8 years. So did the Ukrainians attack the rebels more intensively in early 2022? It appears so. If so, why did they do that? And I think the answer is that the US has huge influence over the Ukrainian government. Firstly, because the Ukraine wants to be in the Western sphere of influence, the Western world order. It doesn't want to be under the thumb of Russia, so it's kind of seeking to behave, and it's trying to please the US. It's trying to obey the US and be its vassal. But also, the US has boasted. If you look, you Google these words: Victoria Nuland, $5 billion Ukraine, and you can see a video of Victoria Nuland, a very powerful American political figure, boasting about the huge amounts that America has put into the Ukrainian political system. Money has incredible consequences in politics. Money is power in a Western-style political system. I think the figure was $5 billion by 2014 in the Ukraine, so presumably since 2004. So about $500 million per year in political donations. That is gargantuan. The entire Ukrainian GDP is only something like 200 billion a year in that whole period. So it's what? It's 1/400th of the entire Ukrainian GDP consisted purely of foreign political donations. I mean, that is crazy. That's like an entire minor segment of their economy, like an entire cottage industry, just being donations from America. Now that then raises, okay, so we've said, well, Putin attacked because the Ukrainians were attacking the rebels. The rebels were attacking the Ukrainians were attacking the rebels more because the US wanted them to. So then, why did the US want the Ukraine to attack the rebels? And I think the answer to that has to be Nord Stream 2. I think we have to fit Nord Stream 2 into this video somewhere. Nord Stream 2 is a gas pipeline with, I think it's 55 billion cubic meters per year capacity, doubling the Baltic route of gas supply from Russia to Germany. Now, from the United States perspective, if Russia is selling huge amounts of gas to Germany, then that means that Germany, firstly, it has cheap electricity, and it has cheap home heating, and it has competitive industry running off those cheap electricity plants and the cheap heat. So firstly, it means Germany becomes more economically powerful. Secondly, it also means this major country, Germany, and also the rest of Europe, but it's not just Germany, is beholden to Russia. It has a reason to be nice to Russia because it wants the Russian gas and it's getting the Russian gas. So that's bad for the US. If the US can shut down Nord Stream 2, it means that the US can sell more of its own gas to Europe, and it means that Europe has to buy, it doesn't have as competitive manufacturing because its electricity prices go up. So again, it has to buy more from the US because guess what? We're sanctioning Russia. So we can't make our own things. We can't get them from Russia either. We have to get them from the United States. And guess who rules the United States? Corporations, the guys that make things, you know. So there's the motive for that. And we saw this quite explicitly earlier on in the year. We saw Olaf Scholz being pressured diplomatically to promise. The United States wanted Olaf Scholz, who is the German Prime Minister, to promise that he would cancel the Nord Stream 2 pipeline if Russia intervened in Ukraine. Something also to consider is that Nord Stream 2 has been on the cards for ages. Pipelines take like a whole decade to build and plan, but it was completed this year. So you have a completed pipeline, and the temptation to use a completed pipeline is immense. So you have to have something gigantic. So that's my theory. I think the US made Ukraine attack the Donbass more in order to pressure the Germans into cancelling Nord Stream 2. And I know that's very complicated, but I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think if you're asking why this war happens now in 2022, I think you have to address this very important pipeline that got physically completed in 2022 as well. By the way, this narrative that I'm constructing, which is kind of conspiracy theory, that the US controlled the Ukrainian assaults on the Donbass rebels and ramped them up, I think that would also explain why the US was able to make these predictions of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Supposedly, the West was predicting this Russian invasion just based on its own observations and its own intelligence gathering. But if the US has the ability to make the Ukraine attack the Donbass rebels more, then that would also explain how the US was able to predict the invasion. And it would also explain why the US and its predictions of invasion were not entirely accurate. We actually were saying that they would invade 2 weeks ago, and there was a whole period of a week and a half where the Russians withheld from invading, longer than we thought. And then they eventually did invade. Now, that would kind of be consistent with us getting the Ukrainians to attack the rebels. We say, oh, the Russians are going to invade. The Russians still don't invade because Putin right here in the top left is a very cautious and intelligent person. So we ramp up the pressure on the Donbass even more. Now, I'm not presenting any evidence in this video that the Ukraine was actually deploying huge amounts of pressure on the Donbass. It's something that I believe happens. If in the next few days from now, which is the 27th of February, if we see that Russia manages to encircle the Ukrainian army, and it just so happens to be located in the southeast of the country near Donbass, well, then that kind of proves that the Ukrainian army was indeed deployed against the Donbass, although this is something you can probably find out just from primary sources if you want to bother looking it up. I can't be bothered. I want to get on to the next 5 points of this video, because the first point was the most important one. The second point is, I think, the second most important one, China. You sanction Russia, let's say you totally sanction it. It's only 120 million population or something. It has huge natural resources, but it's still not the hugest economy in the world. It's up in the top 5 or something. I mean, it's probably the third biggest, depending on how you measure it. or it could be something, it could be smaller than Japan, arguably, depending on whether you think raw materials are more important or whether you think finance is more important. But it could still be pretty severely sanctioned. Now, something huge has changed since 2014 to 22, which is that China has become vastly more powerful than it was even 8 years ago, and it has created this very strong alliance with Russia. Previously, it was just on good terms diplomatically, and in terms of trade. Now they are in a very real alliance. They have even begun integrating their military capabilities. China also has started creating tensions with Taiwan and threatening the US and the West over Taiwan. That wasn't the case anything like so much 8 years ago. And so they even have a secret, well, they have an understanding between Russia and China that if Russia gets attacked in Europe, China will attack Taiwan. And by the same token, if Taiwan is given weapons and given nukes by the West, and China decides, well, we have to attack them now or never, Russia will at the same time attack in Europe. So they have made a mutual defense pact or a mutual aggression pact, depending on how you want to look at it. So that's very, very important. Like, it might make sense to sanction Russia if it's on its own. It does not make sense to sanction Russia when it has the backing of China, which is the world's biggest economy. It's bigger than the US now, I'm sure. Now, those are the two biggest reasons. Let's get on to the third one. Belarus, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan and Armenia. These are all countries which have previously tried to strike a balance between Russia and the West. They have tried to have decent relations with both the West and with Russia. That has changed in all four of these countries in just the past 2 years. Let's do it country by country. Belarus, it had Lukashenko in power. He is a Putin-style authoritarian figure. However, he actually resented Putin bursting onto the scene and becoming the president of Russia, because Putin was a young upstart back in the 1990s. Lukashenko was a much more established figure. If Putin had not become the ruler of Russia, Lukashenko in Belarus could have become the ruler of Russia instead. And so Lukashenko had this slightly prideful attitude, and so he pursued a slightly anti-Western point of view, anti-Russian. He tried to strike a balance. Instead of just being friendly to Russia, he was also friendly to the West. He tried to play them both off against each other. That changed in 2020. The West ran a protest movement. The West supported an attempted revolution against Lukashenko, and Lukashenko was saved only by the intervention of Russian security forces. And since then, Lukashenko has decided that he has no choice but to subordinate himself to the Kremlin. And he has to be Putin's right-hand man, or he will get deposed because the West tried to get rid of him. Then there's Kazakhstan. Something very similar happened there. Nazarbayev was the old Kazakhstani guy, and he also tried to move Kazakhstan away from Russia. They tried to create... They've begun creating a Latin alphabet language, a Latin alphabet version of their language, their script, instead of just using Cyrillic. They have given all of the oil and gas concessions to Western companies. However, that was under Nazarbayev. He's getting very old. He's something like 82. So for the past 2 years, this relatively more pro-Russian and pro-Chinese guy called Tokayev has been in power, with Nazarbayev formally advising him, but Tokayev has done more of the day-to-day business because he's only 60 instead of 80. Now, what happened in 2022, early 2022, is there was again a Western-backed rebellion, revolution, mass protests, supposedly pro-democratic, and that was actually, I believe, also trying to reinstate Nazarbayev. Instead, Tokayev was supported by Russia, and they basically kicked out Nazarbayev. They ended the protests, and there's now a pro-Russian guy, Tokayev, in charge of Kazakhstan. Then there's Azerbaijan and Armenia. Again, there was a protest movement in Armenia that was pro-Western. They got rid of the old corrupt pro-Russian party. Azerbaijan then invaded because Russia was the only thing protecting Armenia from Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan didn't technically invade Armenia. They invaded part of Azerbaijan that is populated by Armenians and has been in a state of rebellion ever since then, ever since the fall of the Soviet Union. And it's actually quite similar to the Donbass in Russia. So Russia then intervened and it stopped that war. It set up huge bases in both countries, and it basically controls the situation. Just last week, Azerbaijan signed an alliance with Russia of some kind, and the Armenians, who wanted to be Western and democratic, have realized, well, actually, it's more important that we are protected by the Russians from being genocided by these Muslims in Azerbaijan. And I think that just about covers that situation. Oh yeah, I do want to mention this place that got invaded by the Azerbaijanis is called Artsakh, or Nagorno-Karabakh. It is, like I said, it was assigned to Azerbaijan by the formal legal borders of the Soviet Union, but it is populated by Armenians, and that is why they rebelled. And this is very similar to the situation in the Donbass. Those people in the Donbass are not Ukrainians, they are Russians. Ukraine decided to be mean to them in terms of language rights and a few other things, therefore they rebelled. Now, I've seen Westerners say that that if the Russians don't like it, they should just leave and go to Russia instead of rebelling from Ukraine and trying to take part of Ukraine. Well, why do you place such value on the borders of the USSR that were set in the USSR's time? Because another thing that the USSR borders have is they have Armenians being ruled by Azerbaijani Muslims who brought in ISIS terrorists and Pakistani mercenaries to genocide them just in 2020, very recently. How is that a good thing? Why do you support that border? Do you think all of those Armenians in Artsakh and Nagorno-Karabakh should have to choose between leaving their ancestral homeland that they've been in for 2,000 years, or between being ruled by Muslims who hate them and want to destroy their churches and rape them and all the rest of it? That is stupid. I see Westerners speaking as if the USSR's internal boundaries are perfect for being the borders of modern-day sovereign states. It's completely idiotic. You should just stop talking like that. It's very foolish. It's a very foolish way to think about it. But anyhow, that explains number 3. Russia has secured the alliance of these 4 countries nearby to it, and that makes its position far stronger. Incidentally, the state of Georgia, which is next to Russia and Armenia, has also been very limited in its support for the sanctions on Russia, because now it's next to Russia and Azerbaijan and Armenia, all of whom are on Team Russia. So Russia has secured... Oh, and Kazakhstan has all of these railways that are between Russia and China. So it's a very important place to hold. When you have sanctions on your economy, the more territory you can have, the more that you secure your supply of all kinds of different industries and natural resources. That's why point 3 in this video is important. It's not just painting a map. Now, number 4 is that the West is much less able to sanction Russia. We literally can't sanction Russian gas and refuse to buy it because we need it. If we stop buying Russian gas immediately today, our power plants will run out and stop producing electricity, our grid will go down, and we will not be able to heat our homes. And it's still winter, it's still February. So because we had the lockdowns, we had the pandemic, and we kind of kicked ourselves in the nuts economically, we now have supply chain issues. We are the ones with supply chain issues. We're talking about Russia. We're the ones struggling to source resources. Gas, the price of gas is very high right now. That means it's expensive. It also means that it's difficult to get as much as we want. That's why it's high, because there is a limited supply. We literally can't afford to reduce our supply of gas even more. People talk about sanctioning the Russians. At this point, we would be the ones being sanctioned, and that brings me back to my point about the US trying to weaken Europe's economy so that it can have Europe dependent on the US for its gas and for its other things. Now, that is point 4. Point 5 is that Russia has actually been under Western sanctions already for 8 years. They've had 8 years to prepare themselves for sanctions, to reshape their economy, to be self-sufficient, and they've become, for example, a food exporter. Point 6, actually I'm going to add a new point 6 here. Russian strength has grown, especially military. Now, everyone thinks about Russia as quite an old power. It used to be the USSR, it's a lot weaker now. But in reality, it's recovering from the 1990s economic disaster. And Russia's economy and its military have actually become far more powerful in the past 8 years. And that's a pretty straightforward point. Russia also has produced some very, very advanced military technology recently. Some kind of submarine-carried weapons system that can threaten cities from offshore. I don't remember what it is exactly. You have hypersonic missiles, and of course you have the S-400s. I mean, let's just write that down. S-400, air defense. So, can the West threaten Russia militarily? with our air forces? Well, no, because Russian air defenses are the best in the world. Then, number 7, I believe the Biden regime in America is very weak. Leaving aside what we think of, I mean, look, everyone knows that Biden is senile. You can see that. Would you rather have, if you had to get in a plane and you had to have someone pilot your aeroplane, would you like it to be Kim Jong-un? Well, I don't know about him. Would you like it to be Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping? Absolutely. They would get you there. They would pilot that plane easily. Would you like it to be Donald Trump? He could learn to pilot a plane. He probably doesn't know. I'm sure these guys know instantly because they're geniuses. Kim Jong-un could learn to pilot a plane. Biden could not pilot a plane. He's senile. He's past it. And of course, there's more to it. There's more to American politics than just Biden. There's also the fact that the Democrat administration in America is highly, highly unpopular. The polls are disastrous. You're going to see a record victory for Republicans in the midterm elections in 2022, and you could easily see President Trump get re-elected for the 3rd time in 2024. Because I believe he did win. Oh, no, I can't say that. Fuck. Oh, can't say that on YouTube. Well, I'm just going to say it on YouTube. Implicitly. Who cares? It's a small channel. I don't care if it gets deleted. Whatever. You only live once. I think that just about covers everything, you know. These are all... So, coming back to the original title of this video, these are all explanations of why it's happening now in 2022. The West has grown weaker with these points. Russia has grown... Russia has grown stronger with these points. 4 and 7 show the West getting weaker. Russia got very much stronger with points 2 and 3. And then point number 1, the most important point of all, is that the US wanted to pressure the Germans into cancelling Nord Stream 2. And amazingly, the Germans still have only delayed Nord Stream 2's approvals. They actually still have not formally cancelled it, unless they've cancelled it while I was making this video. So that's that video for you.